you may type them in the chat and I'll help facilitate a discussion at the end of the presentation. Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy scheduling to attend today's workshop. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Cindy Guerrero. Dr. Guerrero is a research scientist in the Department of Educational Psychology in the Bilingual Education Program. She received her degree from Texas A&M University in 2015 and currently is the lead coordinator on large-scale grants. Her research includes language and literacy development of economically challenged, rural, and bilingual/English learner students, and professional learning for teachers of economically challenged rural and bilingual EL students. So I hope you join me today in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Cindy Guerrero, and she is going to share a workshop titled Tips for Improving Your Presentation Skills today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Guerrero, and she is free to start sharing her slides and start our workshop today. Welcome, Dr. Guerrero.
Hello, greetings everyone. I was going to say good morning, but as Jordan said, we're not all in the morning time. I'm so happy to be here. It's my pleasure. And thank you again, especially at this time of the year, towards the end of the academic semester. We know there's a lot going on as graduate students and staff and faculty. So I appreciate your time today. We're going to talk about today and share some ideas on how we can improve our presentations. So here you can see the 4 P's of presenting, tips to polish your presentations. So as Jordan said, my name is Cindy Guerrero. I am a research scientist here at Texas A&M. I have about 20 years of experience starting back a while back as a public school teacher, and then came out of the classroom and have experiences training teachers in the research role as well. Some of the presentations or recruitment is related to getting partners, recruiting school districts and administrators and teachers and partners to be part of some of our various research initiatives. Also have had the honor of instructing both undergraduate and graduate courses and presenting at a variety of different conferences, both in the United States and internationally. So I'm excited to chat with you all today. I hope that this is interactive when possible, because I think that all of us have rich experience in presentations, and I'd love to have this opportunity for us to share some of our best tips in presenting. So we do have our outcome or our purpose for today's presentation. So the takeaway or our goal would be to have improved presentation skills. And of course, our audience is graduate students, staff, and faculty. And hopefully today, as we work through this information, you're self-reflecting on presentations that you have implemented yourself, or maybe thinking back on some of the presentations in which you've been the audience. So before we get started, this could be, Jordan, I'm not sure how you want to best facilitate this. This could be open mic or chat. Let's brainstorm some of the different types of presentations specifically related to your positions in academia.
A paper, maybe?
Yeah, Dr. Singer says maybe you're presenting a paper. Go ahead and you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your little hand on Zoom. Since there's a small group of us starting today, I hope it grows throughout, and I can call on you to live speak because, like I said, we have that opportunity today with our numbers. I know I just got back from AERA and I saw a lot of people presenting either their research or their work with their research grants as well. A poster, yeah, conference paper, marketing a recruitment meeting, conference paper, workshops, roundtables. Dr. Sutton Jones says teaching presentation or an invited speaking presentation.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Singer, for bringing up some of the different formats when you might be presenting at a conference. It could be the paper presentation or that smaller group where you're sitting around the table on a united topic, or where you're standing in front of what used to be a paper poster, but now it's an electronic screen sharing the research. So it's more of a walk around, meet and greet type of piece. Yes. So also, I'm trying to see a response from some of our graduate students. I mean, lots of presentations embedded in your classes, right? Or those of us who may be instructors, our adjuncts, or certainly faculty, the presentations that we prepare for our students in our courses. Yeah, lit review presentation for class. Absolutely. So obviously, in academia, we have a large need, oftentimes for this skill to be utilized in a variety of contexts. So now I want you to think about a little bit, no names, okay? I want you to think about some presentations in which you've been the audience that are the most memorable and why. And that could be memorable in a positive way, or it could be memorable in a not so positive way. But what presentations were the most memorable for you?
Hey, Dr. Singer says interactive. Shared a moving experience of others. One of our graduate students, future Dr. Walderon. Visually appealing. I would have to say some of the presentations that I feel like have been most meaningful is when you could tell the speaker was really passionate about what they were talking about. Dr. McMurray says engaging, sometimes funny and meaningful. Multimedia presentation, connection with the speaker or audience.
What about some of the ones that maybe are memorable and what you wouldn't want to see in a presentation? Reading the slides. Yeah. Or even reading the slide and you're facing the slides, right? Which also limits your voice projection. You're not really able to connect with the presenter when their back is to you. Oh, Jordan, overwhelming slide content. Okay.
Unkind feedback. What do you mean by that, Dr. Sutton Jones? Can you clarify?
Sometimes you might get people at a presentation, maybe they're colleagues, maybe they're random audience members, but like if you go to a conference and they come back with rather scathing commentary or aggressive questioning, I've seen that before.
And so you remember that as in you were on the receiving end, or even just you were in the audience and you were kind of like, oh my goodness.
Both.
Okay.
Yes. Being interrupted during the presentation. Lack of connection to the objective. So maybe you're implying, Tamara, like kind of hard to follow where the presentation is going.
Yeah, where you just can't see the alignment between what you're trying, they're saying they're presenting versus what you're getting out of the presentation.
Okay. Great. Thank you for your input and kind of reflection and thinking about that. We're going to go ahead and move forward. So today we're going to discuss 4 P's of presenting. And the first P, of course, is to plan. Give me a moment to read this. Any thoughts or comments on this quote?
I would have never thought of it that way. But I really do see that connection now. Like you should be tailoring your presentations and not just saying, oh, I have to present on this topic. Well, I have a presentation on this topic and they're completely different audiences and for completely different functions.
Thank you for bringing that up, Jordan. Absolutely. And we'll talk to that in just a little bit. Yes, we really need to not underestimate the importance of considering our audience in the presentation. Yeah, not just a generic kind of presentation to whom it may concern. Yeah, when I saw this, I was like, this hit home to me in terms of like, okay, that really makes sense, like you said, Jordan. So one of the things when we're planning is we certainly want to filter through what is our goal or outcome or purpose of the specific presentation? A lot of times, based on whatever position you're in, if you're a student in a class and you're presenting information, if you're going to a conference, if you're presenting research, whatever type of presentation you're in, it's likely you have a huge amount of information that you could potentially share, right? But really figuring out, thinking about what is the most relevant material for my goal as a presenter, and what I feel like I need to share, material to share. So what material do I need to present specifically, considering the audience, right? So who is this geared towards? What are the audience experiences, if we know that, or if we can assume what some of their experience or their context be? What prior knowledge may they be bringing or not bringing? And so maybe it's an opportunity where we might need to set up a few things or define a few concepts or terms to kind of get them to have a good understanding of what we're going to be talking about. And then what are the intended takeaways? Not only what you as a presenter would hope that your audience walks away with, but also thinking about what is the audience's interest. If you were a person in that audience, what would you want to walk away with to make it meaningful and where they feel like it's worth their time and they're walking away with some important information or a skill set. And then, of course, we want to tailor, you said that exactly, Jordan, tailor the content delivery to your audience. So if we know that I'm going to use Dr. Singer's example, if she is working on presenting a family engagement presentation to parents in a local school district, right? She's going to think about that. Okay, who's my audience? And she's going to gear her content towards that. What examples are relevant to them, right? What terms should I use? What terms might I need to clarify or define? So it's really customized for those parents. And even thinking about what languages may need to be represented to meet the needs of those parents, understanding the information presented. And so I love also reflecting on the quote about it's not to whom it may concern, is just because we have a presentation that's already developed on particular content doesn't mean that we can just cookie cut that, copy it and say, yes, this is a presentation that we developed to share the research components with the faculty or the principal, the principal investigators were sharing with other faculty. That's one presentation and maybe we were describing the components of family involvement. That would certainly not be a paste and copy for the presentation that would be delivered to the families, right? So important that just because we have a presentation on a topic doesn't mean that it's ready to go and apply to all audiences. Certainly you could potentially use it as a starting point, as a draft, but you always want to consider the audience. So that's the first P, is really looking at planning. Sometimes it's helpful to have an outline. When I start a presentation, I usually just start with some blank slides and I'll just start to put kind of the big topics. That way I can at least kind of unload all the things that I believe should be presented. And then throughout revising and drafting it, it gets tighter and some things are removed and some things are added. When we're thinking about, oh yeah, thank you, Tamara. She's reflecting on, and thank you for reflecting on our stakeholders that have different goals and interests. Yes, in the education process. Did you want to elaborate on that at all, Tamara?
Just adding to what you were saying, Dr. Guerrero, about how administrators might talk to their teachers is going to look very different than how it would look talking to the parents or talking even to the superintendent, other administrators. Mm-hmm. And I think, like you said, sometimes we think, okay, well, I have a presentation on this, it's good for everybody, but rarely is that the case, because you're going to impact that audience differently by customization. Mm-hmm. If you really want to, specifically, if you're trying to persuade them, mm-hmm. right, you want to make sure that you're going to use things that would persuade them, in a way that you're trying to lead them. So I think it's really important to do that. And I think all too often we see kind of those, blanket presentations where you're like, what does this have to do with me? Right? Where do I, how does this help me? Right? How can I use this expertise in my context? So, context matters in that case. And when it comes to audience, that's part of your context, right? So I think, like you said, it's really important to do that so that you're getting your message to that specific audience.
And also, if we go back to what some of you commented on, what makes a presentation more memorable, it's feeling like it's relevant to you, right? Or making connections with the presenter. And so when a presentation is catered or tailored to the audience, I think the audience is more engaged because you're like, oh, this is about me, or I can relate to this, or I understand this, or I've experienced something like this. So it just makes the whole engagement and outcome just more aligned. So the second P, we're talking about preparation. And if we think about just kind of broad preparation, we want to make sure we have a beginning, middle, and end of our presentation. And oftentimes, again, like I mentioned, when drafting, we might have a lot of ideas, and this could be said and this could be presented. But at some point in your development of your presentation and revising, you want to be pretty succinct. You want to be concise and make sure that's aligning to your purpose or your outcome that you state at the beginning of your presentation. So you want to make it very apparent what you're going to, we're always told this when I was in my teacher training, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And Erin's like, I can see her like, yes. I'm sure some of you have heard that as well, because you also want to be really strategic in throughout your presentation to repeat important ideas, right? And make connections between the most important ideas. So if we think about the beginning of the presentation, and you may just think about the beginning of this presentation, somehow you want to engage your audience. You want to establish your credibility. I talked a little bit about some of my experiences in developing presentations, and then you want to share your purpose. Then when you're working on the middle of your presentation, kind of the meat of it, if you will, you're deciding what information to present. It is really important to make connections between your ideas and kind of link them. So you're not just jumping around from idea to idea, or things are not connected, because that's really hard for the audience to follow. You're going to lose your audience really quickly in that way. And as much as you can, try to engage your audience throughout your presentation. So there was one example I wanted to share with you. I think it was last year, and I was up in Dallas at a conference for science teachers, and I was presenting some of what we do with literacy infused science. And so in the room before the presentation, of course, you always want to get there early and set up and all that good stuff, and check the technology and the mic and have your water. But the teacher started to come in, and I had the opportunity to walk around, and I was like, hi, how are you? Where are you from? Oh, you drove that far. I'm so glad you're here. What district, what grade level do you teach? And just, greet them as much as you can and kind of get to know who your audience is, because you don't always know the details of your audience beforehand, right? And in the preparation phase. Of course, I knew that the audience were going to be teachers, but I didn't know if most of them were going to be early learning, middle school, high school. And it ended up, after meeting some of the people in the audience, it was a wide variety of science teachers from all over the state. But that was very important, because throughout the presentation, as I was presenting strategies or examples, I could say, oh, yes, I remember you're working with seniors in this science concept. How does this relate to you? Or what would you do with this strategy in your classroom? Okay, but what about if we look at the other edge of the spectrum? We have kindergarten science teacher over here. How would you use this? So that they are reflecting and thinking about applying the information that you're sharing, but you're also exhibiting that the strategies can be used across grade levels, right? So no one feels like isolated. Oh, this information isn't for me. So it's really important. I think that's one example of how you can make connections with your audience and engage them throughout your presentation. Has anyone experienced PowerPoint poisoning before? PowerPoint poisoning. I thought this was really funny. Slide 397. Okay. That's excessive. Yes, for sure. So what I want to share with you now is an alternative to consider other than PowerPoint poisoning. And we can think about how to avoid what we might think about the standard boring presentation and how you can integrate a narrative or telling a story in your presentation. So I'm going to, oops, sorry, let me get out of this and come over here. Here we go.
Can you raise your volume, Dr. Guerrero?
I can, and just in case the volume isn't necessary,
Oh, okay.
reading the text
Okay.
should suffice, but yes, I'm absolutely raising my volume. Thank you. I found that clip entertaining, but also I was excited that it was relevant in the context that a lot of times what we are sharing is research, right? And here's what we know. Here's what we were wondering about, here's what we did, and now here's the story and moving on. So even when presenting research, you can still embed kind of that narrative story to change it from an and this and this and this to more of that, what they called the and, but, and therefore kind of formula. So something to consider that you might want to think about the next time that you're presenting some of your research to try to embed a narrative piece to that. So also, when we're thinking about engaging our audience, we just talked about the importance of telling a story. We all know that visuals are really very important. I'm not sure if you knew that at least 65% of people are visual learners. And, when our brain sees things, it helps us, of course, process information. And the brain can process images and videos 60,000 times faster than text. I was like, wow. I mean, it makes sense. When we see something, we process it more quickly and have a different level of understanding. But it just really emphasizes the importance of including impactful visuals in your presentations. So the next couple slides I'm going to show you, I'm sure many of you know this, but in case you don't, one resource that I use often is called Slides Carnival. And what I love about that is that the templates that you can get online, and they're free templates. You either can get them in Google Slides or you can download them as PowerPoint, or even if you want to do it in Canva. They have kind of a formula that includes some of the best practices of presentations already built into their slide templates. So I'm just going to show you a few of those. So in this presentation template that I downloaded, there's already a template for, to include a picture, right? So it's kind of prompting you as you're developing your presentation. The template itself is prompting you. A picture is worth 1,000 words. If you're talking about teamwork, maybe instead of having like two hands together or a cartoony picture of somebody pulling somebody up a mountain, maybe it's a real image of a realistic, here we have organisms that work together to accomplish a goal. So we can also think about analogies in that way. So pictures, if they're high quality, we don't want to see any of those pictures that have the watermark on them because we just took them off of the internet without permission. High quality images are very impactful. Of course, diagrams. And again, this is a template that's already built into the slide presentation. So you could, enter or customize your information for a diagram. We know we can use tables to compare data. We want to be careful when we're visualizing data. That first, the size is large enough and the font is large enough for our participants to read it, but also that it's very clear. We make clear what the comparisons or relationships are in the data that we're showing. Graphic organizers, of course, to help connect ideas are very helpful. So we want to not only use, when we're using PowerPoint, just use the bullets or the text slides. We want to be able to use these visual slides as well. And it helps engage us and keeps our brain having a little bit of variety to keep our attention span. Sometimes maps are appropriate if you're showing a heat map or where your impact is in different parts of the world. Sometimes you're looking at reach of your projects or funding goals. So sometimes you just want to emphasize those numbers or some of these different kinds of maybe participants or something like that. So there's definitely ways to do that effectively without just bullet points and without reading from your slides. And it's great that many of our resources templates already include kind of that prompt for you. So certainly another way to engage our audience is online software. Many of us might be familiar with something like Kahoot or Mentimeter to be able to embed or conduct a poll during your presentation or a survey, or even generate a word cloud. So I'd love for some of you to share any other of your favorite kind of audience interactive tools that you enjoy using or you found success with. Padlet. Plickr. Oh, I haven't seen Plickr. Tim, you have to show that. Pear Deck. Yes, Pear Deck is nice. I think whenever, we rolled into the pandemic, a lot of these became second nature because we were having such online synchronous meetings more often. Nearpod. Yes, Nearpod is dear and near to my heart. And that can really be a powerful tool to get feedback and actually formative assessment from the participants. I use Nearpod in my courses, my graduate and undergraduate courses. Any other favorites? Now, of course, there's always the technology piece to that is when we're presenting. And if we're doing that during a presentation, we need to make sure that we're troubleshooting that to try as much as possible to alleviate any glitches. We don't want your presentation to derail, for it to take 5 minutes for you to take a 20-second poll. It may or may not be worth it for that. And then it's hard to get your audience back to be engaged. Spinners, okay. So talking about structuring your presentation as we wrap this piece up, as you come to the end, of course, you want to say what you've told them. You want to clarify. If you see, you're always monitoring your audience. If you kind of see the deer in the headlight looks or they're chatting together, you might say, okay, was there any part that I could clarify? Do you have any questions? And then you want to wrap up with discussion of takeaways and applications or what the next steps may be. I thought this was a pretty good quote too, and I had to read it a couple times. Make sure you finish speaking before your audience has finished listening. Right? Engage your audience, read the room, know when they're getting to capacity, know when interest is turning or waning, and do what you can to bring them back in or change to the next topic, or, that's a great cue for you to do some kind of engagement activity with them. Or it's also a cue that maybe you're just talking too much, right? Or getting off topic. So it's like, okay, let me bring myself back in. Just like teaching. The third P is practice. It is very important for you to practice your presentations. It does build your confidence. Raise your hand if you ever get nervous when you're about to do a presentation. Me, I had butterflies this morning at 2:00 this morning. Been doing it for 20 years. I still get nervous. It's normal. Do build your confidence through practice. This morning, I asked one of the colleagues, Andrea, to come over. It's like, can I run this through one more time with you? Which was really helpful because sometimes in our mind, it makes sense. And we read through the slides internally and it makes sense. But then when you start to speak to it, it doesn't. And you can see their reaction like, oh, maybe that transition isn't as good as I thought it was, or maybe the slide needs to go here. And you can make those minor revisions with your practice partner rather than just figuring that out when you're in front of your real audience, right? And that, of course, build your confidence. Timing, we always know, is super important. Like right now, I'm looking, it's 10:36. So that helps me kind of track what I know is still coming up and how much time that I want to make sure to allow for any discussion. I know sometimes Jordan mentioned AERA, and many of you were able to go this year, which is amazing. Which, if you're not familiar, it's a huge research conference held every year. This year it was in Chicago. And some of the platforms that you have or the types of presentations you have are symposiums. So maybe there's a number of papers being presented on a similar topic, and you may only have 12 minutes to present your research. So, and usually your research, it's high quality research. It had to be, to be accepted, to make the cut, to be presented. And so you really have to practice and make sure, am I sharing what I intend to share with the audience in that 12 minutes? Right? Thank you, Hamada. Knowing your content, down, up, backwards, all around, right? Knowing what's coming next in your presentation, practicing enough that you know what your next topic or slide is going to be so that you can help make true, smooth transitions. And like I mentioned also, practicing in front of others, really important. The last P when we're talking about polishing or preparing our presentations is perform. And here are what I found are some characteristics of successful presenters. They own and organize the time. Aware of their body language. So we want to be careful that you might be saying the things, but maybe your face isn't very friendly. The look on your face might not be friendly at that moment, right? You want to make eye contact with the audience as much as you can. If possible, you may even want to, if you have like a lapel mic, you may even want to, walk around and have proximity so that the audience feels kind of drawn in. You don't want to stand there like this, right? That gives that closed, or, just being aware of what your face and your eyes and your hands and your feet, your body language, because all eyes are on you during that time. Engaging in active listening. So you're monitoring and reading the room, but also listening to any questions from your audience, obviously. Know when to stop talking. We mentioned that a little bit earlier. Successful presenters are so familiar and have practiced enough with their presentation that they've built their confidence, and they don't often use fillers like, yeah, and I'm kind of like that, right? So, and I'm doing it right now. So you want to try to just practice your presentation enough to where it comes off very clearly and straightforward and the least amount of fillers as possible. And most importantly, and I love that many of you mentioned this at the beginning of what was memorable presentations that you've been an audience, is a positive energy. The enthusiasm, the energy, whatever the speaker or the presenter is bringing will absolutely flow over to the audience. If I'm talking in a monotone kind of voice, it's not going to excite anyone. My brain's already going to be like, oh, I'm done with this. I can't listen to this for 12 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes. You want to try to be as positive, as enthusiastic, and as passionate as you can be about the topic, but also being authentic, right? You're not putting on a pony show, or you're not being fake. You just want to show yourself and your personality and be positive. Okay, so what I'd love for us to do now, and we can hopefully open the mics and have some discussion, because I would love to hear some of your tips or learnings or experiences. So self-reflect on your previous presentations and then discuss how you might plan to improve your presentation skills moving forward.
I can start for class when I give presentations, even if, especially at this level, when you've done a lot of presentations before, um, some of the rubrics now don't really focus on the actual skills of presenting. They're more focused on content, because my professors assume like, hey, you gave presentations to undergrad, you gave them in masters, you might have given them in your jobs. So they might not be as focused on like the skills of presenting, but even if that's the case, I always ask them to give me feedback on how I presented and like what things they thought were good, what things they thought I could improve on, and like how my timing was.
Yes.
Yeah, so even if it's not part of the rubric, I ask them for feedback. And then Dr. Afarji actually said a good strategy he did. He said he didn't really know how to manage his facial expressions and body language until he saw photos of himself
Oh.
presenting. So maybe like photos or videos of yourself, you can
Mhm.
realize how much time you spend actually turned looking at your slides instead of looking at the audience.
Jordan, I'm so glad. Well, thank you, Amana, for saying that. And Jordan, thank you for your reflection. It made me think of some of what we do in our research and classroom observations. Like sometimes we have participants and we record and observe their classroom, and we give feedback on the interactions that they have with their children, what kind of level they're speaking. There's a whole protocol that we look at. And it is so important. And also when we're coaching teachers, it is so important for us as presenters to self-reflect. So now, Jordan, I'm thinking, I want this recording so I can go back and watch and kind of monitor for myself. This part went well, or I did this, or I kind of fumbled here, to give myself that piece as well, because we don't always get to see ourselves doing the task to be able to reflect on that. I love that idea.
Well, I can definitely give you this recording, and that's something Anna had typed in the chat
Yes.
right as you were saying, is that she likes to watch her presentations after she gives them.
That's great. Yes. And I love what you said also in terms of being open and asking for feedback, to let people know it's okay for you to tell me. I want you to tell me where I can improve. So I think that's an important thing to do as well. Any pointers that maybe you all are bringing that weren't mentioned today on your best tips on how to improve presentations, or moving forward? What's something maybe you're taking away from today that you would embed into your preparation?
I can share some experience from the AERA. So I attended some presentations and the paper presentation sessions. I saw some other presenters presenting. Some of them were not only using visuals, but they were very strategic about the selections of their visuals. Very, very meaningful. And like you mentioned, Dr. Guerrero, it helps prepare your mind for the next slides. So this is something because I use visuals, but in my mind I was like thinking, oh, that's smart. I need to rethink about that, make connections between the visuals in terms of size, colors, connections to the ideas, things like that. So this is something.
Thank you, Hamana, for thinking about that and taking that example
And I really like presentations that incorporate pop culture. The hard thing about that is though, is you're kind of assuming things that everyone has experienced when in reality, like for example, Friends, a lot of people know what Friends are, but some of your audience
Might not.
may not. So it's hard to find references that like most of your audience would get. But when I see presenters do it effectively, um, I really love it as like an audience member. Tamara, you had your hand up and then I think you put it down. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that point is I know oftentimes when you're being taught how to present, they emphasize that hook, right? And same thing with teaching, hook to engage.
Yeah.
I will fumble over a hook if I try. So for me, my authentic self is better at doing kind of like what you said, Dr. Guerrero, is engaging in a more personable way of where are you from? Thanks for coming, because that's more aligned with who I am as a person.
Mhm.
Whereas, my dad could have told a really great joke and would have engaged the audience that way. We're different people in that sense. So I think if you're great at icebreakers and coming in with that's your authentic self, sure, you can add that hook. For me, it was always easier to come in authentically because then you come across that way. You do, like you said, it's not a pony show. I'm not
You're not
there.
forcing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you're uncomfortable and you never know if you're starting the presentation off kind of in a awkward phase because that joke doesn't land, or it's just
Crickets.
doesn't. Yeah, exactly. So I think that really emphasized for me, because you said engage, but you didn't say hook them with a joke or something like that, where that works for me, because I think sometimes I felt that pressure, like I need to start them laughing or something like that. And I just come into the room and make it more awkward by doing that. So I think that's a great tip for presenting, is, really embody the strengths that you have already, which if that's your authentic self, is just being kind and personable, then go with that.
Thank you, Tamara, for that reflection. I love that when you're talking about being your authentic self in your presentation. Also, I think when you're introducing and you're kind of establishing your credibility, thinking about if you know your audience or have a good idea of your audience, what do you have in common with them in saying that? So if it's like I've been a public school teacher, I've also been a teacher trainer and I've done this and that. And depending on who your audience is, different pieces of what you say or your experiences will resonate with them. And they'll be like, oh, okay, we have that in common. She was in the classroom for 8 years. So she has that classroom experience. And so when she's talking about, I'm just going to make something up, classroom management or an instructional strategy, I know it's coming from a place where she's had that context. So thinking about that too, when establishing your credibility or engaging or trying to hook your audience to even be motivated to really listen, to what the information is. Yes, the buy-in. Thank you. You said that much better than I did, Jordan. Thank you. Any other tips? I love if anyone has a top secret tip that they've used for presentations. Thank you, Anna, for sharing that you record yourself. Yes, present yourself as an expert, but also relatable. You don't want to put yourself too high up there where it's like, oh, okay, that's great, but is it related to what I'm doing now, right? Do they have the context? Do they know what's really going on, for example, in the classroom? Just making that particular example.
I like trying to use modeling
Mhm.
when I'm giving a presentation, especially when I'm giving a research presentation that's something that your participants can actually partake in. So for example, for one of my finals, I presented a research proposal on how data collection and like behaviors-based data management systems in schools are hindered in a departmentalized structure. And so my icebreaker was having my audience watch a few antecedent behavior consequence videos
Mhm.
and then take data on it. But I also tried to make it relatable so they understand like what it's like to be a teacher and take data. So while they were watching the video and taking their data, I also had them reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Because when we're teaching, we're going on about a lesson that we know very well, and we're having to make mental markers about what somebody else is doing, one of your students in the corner, to go back and write that data down later. So I tried to make the experience as authentic as possible. And then like after that, I could see like my audience members sit up a little bit and they're like, wait a second, this is really hard. And I don't see how my kindergarten teacher had time for that. And once they were like, this is a problem, they got kind of a little upset about this. They were like, this is really hard to do. I don't know how they do it. Then the rest of my presentation, they were hooked on listening to it because they experienced the problem
Yeah,
themselves.
I love that, a simulation, some kind of experience. Certainly depending on the format of your presentation. You know, if I'm working with doing a teacher training, we're going to have sometimes when we talk about the theories, but then we're going to have some hands-on. Here, get into the materials. Let's practice the implementation. Let's, you know, have modeling, kind of like what you said. I think, Jordan, what you explained, even for people who might not have the context of what you're talking about, you created an experience for them to get an idea. Then they are hooked.
Yeah, because none of them had a teaching experience except
Mhm.
for me and my professor.
Mhm.
So I gave them a mini mock teaching experience for them to experience what it was like to try and be reciting and doing a whole lesson while also watching a situation closely and taking data later. So even though they had never had participated in data collection, they now understood what I was talking about, and data collection wasn't abstract to them.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. We didn't get into, I mean, there's a million presentations we could do on how to polish presentations. There could be one just on data visualization. There could be one on how to create an effective handout. I mean, there could be, you know, just courses on this, but I wanted today just to kind of make it straightforward, talk about these 4 Ps and thinking about ways that you could hopefully have a takeaway to polish your presentation. And an afterthought, Jordan, maybe we should have done this one at the beginning of the semester, you know, before presentations and finals. Yeah, so I don't know if there's any other questions or if anyone wants to unmute and share a tip or share an experience.
All right, drop any questions or comments you have in the chat. And I am also going to hand the rest of this presentation over for moderation to Dr. Afarji because I have a statistics exam to go to.
Oh,
So,
Jordan, bless your heart.
so I've been nervous, but anyway,
Oh.
Dr. Afarji is going to handle discussion facilitation, and we'll close out for y'all. So with that, please drop any comments and things in the chat for presentation skills, and I'll see y'all in spring.
Okay, best wishes, Jordan, on that exam.
Thank you, Jordan.
Bye.
Good luck with your exam.
Thank you.
So we have a handful of graduate students who went to ARA for the first time this year. I'd love to hear a little bit about your experiences, maybe if it was your first time presenting or what you noticed about presentations that you attended.
I can talk a little bit about that. I went to some of our colleagues' presentations, but I also caught a couple mixed presentations. So for me, the most interesting presentations I attended were the roundtable discussions. And like you said, they had 12 minutes or something like that to present research that could have taken years.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really impressive to see how that was managed.
What did you find about the roundtable that you kind of gravitated towards that type of presentation format?
I think that it was really impressive. First off, just the amount of brilliant research going on in one place. So when you consider that it was happening across, 5 different hotels in Chicago, the room that I was in, for the most part, there were 40 plus tables times 5 presenters at each table. That's 200 research presentations going on just in that one room.
Mm-hmm.
And to have them kind of all situated in their own special interest groups it was just really fascinating. But then also to hear the collaboration between different researchers, asking, have you considered this piece? What do you think you're going to find, or where you move? What's the next step for this? So for me, that was always an interesting piece, was asking, well, did you consider, the population of ELs? Because that's where my emphasis is. And so at times heard researchers say, no, we haven't gotten that far. And I'm like, okay, so is that in the plan? Because we should, be considering these populations. And but really just to hear them all discuss their pieces. And I even had a paper presentation where, rather than people thundering out after the presentation, all the presenters again sat and talked and discussed different pieces. Again, in the bilingual sphere, asking how other states looked compared to Texas. And so it was a really nice discussion of academics, in the field, from all kinds of different places in the field, to really discuss the challenges and the successes in bilingual education. So I found that really fascinating.
I've heard several people say that who've just recently attended kind of roundtables, that the intimacy around the table, and that it's all related, that there seems to be more conversation between the audience and the presenters than maybe at a paper, and just like kind of the lecture kind of format. Anna, I wanted to ask you a question. I hate to put you on the spot, but to kind of tailgate off of your presentation that you did about email etiquette. And I know that you do a lot of presentations internationally, and just thinking about some of what you said last time about thinking about the context, and like in Japan, you need to say it this way. So do you have any insight and kind of thinking about focusing to the audience in a global kind of context, or things that you've had to consider when you're customizing presentations?
Thank you, Dr. Guerrero, first of all, for a very timely and great presentation. Well, I think if I travel very often to different, cultures where I have to do the presentation, but I have never had a case when I had to, adjust or keep in mind some, the prior considerations when doing the presentation. So I cannot really recall any experience regarding that. But of course, because all of the presentations I've done, it was for a lot of cultures together, so a lot of nationalities. But I would think if it was intended for one culture in one country, then I think I would probably do a prior research on that country, cultures, and maybe integrate it with the presentation, or the introduction or welcoming, or depending on it. I think it would probably be very contextual, but unfortunately I have never had an experience of just one, so I already had a
Sure, it's a diverse audience.
diverse audience, correct.
It also made me think, Anna, like when we're presenting visuals, or we're looking maybe at some real images to include, we want to make sure that we have diversity included in those. When I was looking for images, there was some videos that had like an Anglo older man as cartoony as a professor, and other people were there listening to him. I was like, well, that's not what it looks like all the time, So just being careful to, when you're selecting, being really sensitive to what you're selecting, to, have genders represented, different cultures represented, when you're selecting the images for your presentation.
Indeed, I totally agree. And just, I guess, to be mindful of their culture, and, even if we may not intend to, offend them, if we don't know, if we are not aware of some information, it might offend them, automatically. So absolutely agree with you.
Thank you, Anna.
Sure.
Okay, we still have a couple of minutes for a final thought or final question. Anybody? Okay, so thank you so very much, Dr. Guerrero. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. And I will send the recording to Jordan, and she moves from there.
Thank you, everyone. Best wishes for wrapping up the semester.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Goodbye.